are now listening to the Rough Tumble Podcast.
This is a big episode for me. That ends so abruptly.
Yeah, I thought
whenever we were
it
recording,
filmed out.
Yeah, no, it just cuts out at the end, but and then when we do it later. But anyways, this is a big episode. My coach is in the studio, Mr. Danny Dring. It feels weird saying your full name, by the way. Danny Dring. So he's here with us to talk a little bit about his history, his upbringing in martial arts, and just kind of goof off with us a little bit. Thank you for coming in.
Man, it's great to be here, guys. I'm excited. I'm really fired up with the whole ambiance of the studio. It just is. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's great way to spend a Sunday afternoon.
I appreciate it. I've mentioned before that this is part of my goal to make sure I bring down everybody else's credibility around me by bringing them onto the podcast. And so I think it's good. Yeah, it's still going? Yeah. And so by association, trying to just ruin everybody else's credibility by being on here. But yeah, I appreciate being on, and this is really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm not even from Arkansas. I'm originally from Louisiana, and I moved up here in 2009. And prior to moving up here, even I knew about your history in Arkansas as a martial artist, and even like your reach within the martial arts community here in Arkansas. And I wasn't even living here at the time.
What part of Louisiana?
So I'm originally from Shreveport-Bossier, but I've got family down around Lafayette and Church Point as well. And so I was moving from Shreveport-Bossier at the time, and where I was training jiu-jitsu at. Some of the guys from the Taekwondo world who trained with us had trained with you in years past and stuff. So.
Who were you training with in Shreveport?
So I was actually in West Monroe at the time training when I first started training jiu-jitsu.
John Blunt?
Yep, exactly. So I started with him. And then Mike Braswell was one of my training partners for a long time, who he runs a school in Bossier now. And so a lot of those guys from the Taekwondo world, including Mike, had mentioned you and knew about you from way back then even.
So I think Braswell's first experience with jiu-jitsu, if I'm not mistaken, was at one of my seminars.
Yeah, I think it was. I think you mentioned that.
I knew him as a kid growing up, trained with John Drew. And John used to have me in for seminars and would cross-train. There's a lot of Taekwondo guys that don't, but there's a lot that do.
Oh, yeah.
And Braswell was always, it's funny, I was just talking about Braswell on the phone earlier, sharing some old stories because the kid liked to train. I mean, he would work out really, really hard.
Yep.
And there were times we'd call each other up and go, man, I just ran bleachers for an hour. And then, we flipped tires. And he was kind of prior to CrossFit hitting the thing, Jim Jones.
Yeah.
He was real into the Jim Jones stuff. And so we kind of share our crazy ass workouts that we were doing, trying to kill ourselves. I still try to stay in touch with Braswell from time to time. He's just a phenomenal martial artist. And just jiu-jitsu. He's got really
good jiu-jitsu. He had a stint as a pro MMA fighter as well, and had a decent record. I can't remember off the top of my head what his record was, but I know that it was decent. And he fought on Bellator and did some fights for No Love Entertainment down south with Rich Clemeni and those guys, and he put it out there. So he did it all. He definitely was a true martial artist, and he retired from MMA years ago, and now he just teaches. He's got some bum knees and stuff, so he doesn't get to train as much, but he still runs his academy, and it's very successful there in Bossier. So, but yeah, Mike and I go really far back. He was one of my first. When I was a white belt, he was a blue belt. Now he's a first degree black belt. So that's where we've come from there. So.
No, that's a cool history. It's a small world in the community. And of course, back in the day, and there just wasn't. You had to really go out of your way to find anybody in jiu-jitsu, and you knew everybody. I mean, there was a time when I knew everybody in about a 4 or 5 state area that was capable of producing an MMA fighter. The original jiu-jitsu, I mean, when it first hit, like my first opportunity to train, first time I ever did a real BJJ seminar was like January of 91 with Jorge and Gracie.
Yeah.
And nobody knew what jiu-jitsu was. And then I put on the first all-amateur MMA show in the nation. I mean, that just, there's a guy named Eddie Goldman who was writing for a newspaper, a rag called the Valley Tudo News. And he called me from New York and interviewed me about putting on a show. And I thought that was really strange that somebody, I mean, like, how did you hear about my show in New York? And at the time, even the first UFCs were pro-am. Like the first time Tito Ortiz fought, he fought as an amateur on the UFC.
Okay.
Which a lot of people, I didn't know that. Yeah, no. I mean, even the original UFCs were pro-am. So almost all the MMA shows in America were pro-am. So to do a straight amateur show was unusual. And yet, if you look at boxers, I mean, boxers get really, really good because by the time they turn pro, they've had, 100, 200 fights. You know, I mean, they've had that opportunity to compete. So that's what made that kind of unique. Now, today, you fast forward some years later, because in really ancient history when we started that out, man, I can't keep track of the garage MMA gyms in Sherwood. I mean, there's everybody and their dog is doing some form of training. And it used to be really, really difficult to find good jiu-jitsu training. I can remember doing fundraisers and we would do whatever we could. And I'd fly to California and get a private lesson with Gokar Chavichian.
Oh, yeah, Gokar.
Alan Goes. You would hit if you heard about somebody that knew some jiu-jitsu doing a seminar. Man, you jump your butt in the car and drive to St. Louis or drive to Dallas or drive to Memphis or wherever you could find somebody that was, bringing grapplers in that honestly knew something. So now, man, I mean, the information age, it's crazy. It
is.
More videos in your inbox. Open up your email and you can't hardly keep track of all the technical stuff that you get is just teasers.
Somebody was trying to tell me, like, you see that video the other day, that guy doing this? Like, dude, I've seen about 100 videos since you started talking. Like,
I'm watching one right now as we're talking.
How am I supposed to keep
It
up
has
with these?
changed a lot. And I started in 2007. So, only 12, 13 years ago. And Johnny, you were right around the same time, right?
Yeah.
Right. And even in 2007, when I started as a white belt, it was almost impossible to find a black belt who was running an academy in your town. Most of them were brown belts, purple belts, and they were under a black belt. In our case, we were under Professor Allen Hopkins out of Mississippi, under Team Hopkins. But I remember trying to find as a young generational grappler, trying to use technology to find those things out there. And there were some DVDs out there, but that was it. There was no YouTube. And so if you wanted to learn through a video, you had to buy the DVD, and they were $50, $60, $70, $100. And this was even back, it was so popular that they were actually, you could get the Pan Ams and the Worlds on DVD.
Yeah.
And, I got for Christmas one year when I was a blue belt, my dad got me the, I think it was the 2009 Pan Ams or 2008. I know it had Cobrinha on the front. And that was a Christmas gift that I got. And I remember that was what I had. I would watch these videos, these competition videos over and over and over again and try to figure out, okay, what are these guys doing at the highest level? Because we didn't have a lot of access to it. And that was in 07. So I can't imagine for you what it was like to try to find that same amount of information with no technology.
No, the information simply didn't exist.
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu has evolved so much because
Just put it over there.
when you first
I like the way I'm doing it.
It's the most inefficient way to drink.
there just simply wasn't the information out there. And originally it was all self-defense or Vale Tudo. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wasn't sport. There wasn't any sport. The first Jiu-Jitsu tournament I ever saw put on, and there weren't a lot of competitions. There wasn't the information dump that you have now. So it was really tough. You're talking about DVDs. I'm thinking, man, we used to just, glom over a VHS tape.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
When dinosaurs roamed the earth, this is how we got our information.
Henzo and Craig Kukuk.
Kukuk, yeah.
Kukuk, yeah. That was like, That was a VHS, and I think it was Henzo and Craig that did their VHS with all their stuff on there.
I have a question for you, Mr. Dring. So, a lot of this is so stupid. It's gonna piss me off every time you do it. Mitch is like trying to like drink his Taco Bell Dr. Pepper, but like slipping it underneath the microphone and this like so stupid. Okay. For those of you that don't know the history of Mr. Dring, and I'm not gonna go through the whole history, but honestly, the father of Jiu Jitsu in Arkansas, you came from a very traditional background as far as like doing Taekwondo. I think you have 130 black belts in different martial arts. But you've found, it seems that you've found, and it's a very smart scheme you got going on, Mr. Dring. No, just a niche of bringing a lot of those traditionalists over to the dark side, starting to learn some jiu-jitsu and starting to incorporate that into their program. And I think it's something that's honestly kind of overlooked. Is a lot of times people kind of write off the traditionalists and it's like, no, they're doing a different art. Why don't you introduce this new art to them? And most of them will pick it up and start doing it as well. How much pushback have you received from maybe the traditional martial arts community, trying to kind of, I guess, preach jiu-jitsu to the masses?
You know, it's funny. So I didn't get into the martial arts to be a stylist.
Right.
You know, I was a small, skinny kid that just wanted to keep my lunch money.
Yeah.
You know, so I actually had trained a little bit as a kid, like when I was 7 years old, you know, with my dad. And at that time, there wasn't very much martial arts anywhere. And we lived in North Little Rock. The school we were going to was over off of Mapleville Pike. And it was a long drive, and my dad's hours changed. So I got a taste, but I didn't really get to keep on. Then fast forward, I dabbled with some boxing. I got back into martial arts, got into Taekwondo. And, you know, I'm going in to learn self-defense. I don't really know anything. You know, especially back then, nobody knew about style. It was that karate stuff. Everything was kind of just lumped under
karate,
the generic term karate, you know. And even today, to the uninitiated, I mean, you know, we do it all the time, so we're highly aware. And it's so funny when, you know, people get offended because their jiu-jitsu is referred to as that karate, you know, that ground karate. It's like, no.
To the day my mom died, she still thought I was a black belt in karate. So
yeah. No, exactly. Well, so to your point, big fan of Bruce Lee. It was interesting listening to you guys talk a little bit about that. Well, we need to dive deeper, and I'll share some stories. Yeah. But I like the whole outfighting, infighting, trapping, grappling, and on the mat. So my deal was always is to be a well-rounded martial artist. I needed to be able to deal with various ranges of fighting. I mean, and I tell people all the time, if I knew, you know, if you're into it, my original stated deal was to be able to defend myself. And if I knew what kind of fight I was going to be in before I got there, there wouldn't be a fight. I just wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
You know?
Don't go to that place.
Yeah, danger. So I feel like, you know, I got into Taekwondo, and really at the beginning, and I loved it. I mean, my first love in the martial arts was kicking. You know, I can remember watching the old Chuck Norris movie with Bill Superfoot Wallace, and he's in the splits and kicking his leg up in the air. And I just thought, man, that was really so cool. Fast forward years later, and I've got an 8th degree black belt with Bill Wallace, and, you know, talk to him and train with him regularly. But that kicking I thought was really cool. But when I go in for self-defense, and what I was taught was kind of martial sport. And then as I dove deeper into it, I felt like, well, it's kind of watered martial sport, you know? I mean, you hit somebody and they yell, stop.
Right.
And in real fights, you hit somebody and then that's when it gets interesting, you know, because they probably want to hit you back.
Yeah.
So from Taekwondo, I got into kickboxing. And then from kickboxing, I got into Thai boxing. And like in the early 80s, nobody knew what Muay Thai was. You know, I mean, that was like a big, you know, that was kind of the underground stuff. And then from the Thai boxing, I can remember getting my hands on a shoot fighting tape that had a guy by the name of Bart Vale on. And it was crazy. These guys are fighting in Japan. And now keep in mind, this is years and years before the first UFC. I'm talking the late 80s. And this guy is like headbutting people into the ground, and they were doing submissions, but they were also, and Bart Vale was a big athletic cat in his day. We're talking a dude that's 260 pounds. I saw a guy grab his leg and he jump spin and heel kicks the guy that's holding his leg. And I was like, well, that's pretty impressive. He dropped him. Mm-hmm. They're on the ground and somebody's got him in his guard. And he puts his hands on the dude's arms and then headbutts him repetitively into submission. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not a guard pass that you see, currently being
not
taught.
Yet. Kids class next week.
Yeah, it'll rack. It'll ruin. It'll just absolutely wreck all 10-year-olds, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
They will not
never
be able to
submitted by a 13-year-old again.
So, but that's what my thing was to be a well-rounded martial artist. Mm-hmm. So in going in, and I just kind of approached that. Last summer, I received my 9th degree in Taekwondo, which in 9th degree, that's Grandmaster. So I would tell you that's my rapper rank, Grandmaster Flash.
Right.
It was part of a journey, though, for sure, in that. And then when I was inducted into the official Taekwondo Hall of Fame, I went over to Bangkok, Thailand, and got inducted in. They do it in various cities around the world, and it just happened to be in Thailand. Well, my picture when they put it up was me wearing a black Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gi and a Muay Thai stance. And I was like, okay, well, that's eclectic. That kind of summed up my whole career.
Right there.
It had, it had nothing to do with Taekwondo, but it did kind of sum up my career. I've always tried to tell people, look, it's all about just learning. It's about training, and I enjoy kicking. I enjoy stretching. I still enjoy, the structure of a traditional martial art. I tell people, look, these traditional blocks are just frames. We frame on the ground. When we're doing jiu-jitsu, it's all about building frames. Well, if you understand what you're doing with some of your stand-up art, you're doing frames, a solid punch. If you want to have a good kinetic transfer of energy from your fist into somebody's face, you need to understand framing, because if, your striking is just your high speed or rapidly framing into somebody. If you kind of think about it like that, well, what it does is it kind of meshes your arts. So no, I do feel like I have enjoyed sharing my love of just training and sharing my love of martial arts with other people. And it's never been to like convince people to change arts. It's, look, you ought to flesh out your knowledge. And it kind of goes back to that out fighting, in fighting, trapping, grappling, and on the mat. You might be a great long distance fighter, but it doesn't do you any good if somebody football tackles you on the ground and has you down. And likewise, man, there's times that, grappling because of your environment from a self-defense perspective isn't going to be what you want to do. I love to duck hunt. And so if I'm in waders waist deep, going to the ground is probably not what I need to do.
And these are situations that Mr. Dring finds himself in on multiple occasions. I've asked the question where he's talking about like, he always preaches like you should carry a ballpoint pen around just in case you need to stab somebody in the throat. And I started to ask, I was like, Mr. Dring, how many times have you actually had to stab somebody in the throat with a ballpoint pen? And then I realized, probably a lot. I've never been in that situation.
But you never know.
I'm starting to question the people that you hang out with.
Well, look, I'm here with you guys. What more do I got to say?
That's strike number one.
Yeah, nailed it. It's always interesting to have that conversation. Because I went. When I started my martial arts journey, it was kind of the same thing. I got into Taekwondo and stuff. And when I was a young kid, all for the same reasons you were talking about, watching Bloodsport and watching Kickboxer, watching every Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, every Chuck Norris movie, Delta Force, all that.
Documentaries.
And for me, it was the same thing when you're talking about the kicking and stuff, because that really, looking back even on my own interest, like that was what attracted me to that martial art, was like the ability to do these. Even when I was watching Power Rangers growing up, all the flashy kicks and things like that was really appealing to me. And I discovered jiu-jitsu kind of on accident, because I went to, when I was on active duty for the military, I went to a Tito Ortiz Ken Shamrock fight at a Hooters, and I'd never seen MMA, and this was 2006, and that was the first time I'd ever seen grappling. Other than one of my old supervisors showed me the UFC 1 with Hoist, and I say this as a joke, but I thought Hoist was like, for the longest time, I thought Hoist Gracie and Oscar De La Hoya were the same people. I didn't know they were two different people.
I have to tell Cecil, one of my students, I have to tell him almost every week that there have been other UFCs since that one. Yeah. He's like, you seen this Hoist Gracie guy? And I'm like, Cecil, there's a lot more UFCs since that one.
But I mean, that was my first introduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was when I saw Hoist, and I honestly thought he was a Mexican guy. I didn't know Brazilians existed or anything like that. I was a young kid. I know it sounds weird to say that, but you know, when you're 19, 20-year-old kid in the military.
The Air Force does teach you something.
Yeah.
See the world.
I was just like, and then I saw Oscar De La Hoya fighting boxing. I was like, man, that guy really does do everything. He really gets around. But, and then moving forward into that, I went through a phase where I was like, no, jiu-jitsu is the only thing that matters. Like, this is the only thing you should do. And I went through that phase for a long time while I was training with Blunchy and those guys. And then as I've matured in my jiu-jitsu, I'm kind of finding myself going back to where I'm realizing, you know, like what you said, carrying a ballpoint pen around all the time, you know, the combatives piece to that, the self-defense piece, and using jiu-jitsu as one of those options within a plethora of options available, you know, because it really is like a superpower. Like when we have this martial knowledge, it's like a superpower. And I think about this all the time, like the things we take for granted, the way that we know how to use our body to hold people in place while still using our hands, you know, like things like that the average person just doesn't know, and we take for granted, I think. But you mentioned the ballpoint pen thing, and when I went through the Air Force Combatives program at the Air Force Academy, we had an entire lab where we went through with a pig carcass, and we would stab it with different things to figure out which ones work.
Fucking weird drill.
Dude,
you just stabbed a pig carcass?
Well, yeah, but it was to check, like it was. So
just to see how difficult it is to actually stab something.
Not just that, but like to show you improvised weapons, how ineffective a lot of improvised weapons really are. Like mine was,
also to create psychopaths.
Yeah. I took a coat hanger and I filed it, a wire coat hanger, and filed it down and wrapped it with tape. And I was like, this is absolutely going to work. Like this is going to be a great tool. The second I stabbed the pig, the coat hanger shot out the other side of the tape, and it never went in. And so, but one guy had an apple peeler. That was the best weapon. Like the way that it was, it made such a good gash and stuff. And then any screwdriver is a great weapon. Mm-hmm. Like, but we used, and those people, we used some ballpoint pens.
Preaching to the choir over here.
No,
I'm loving it.
Yeah. Mr. Dring knows what brand screwdriver you can buy.
Like, it was really cool to see that, you know, because we think that like, the reality of taking a device of any type and stabbing it through human flesh, we all think we can do it until we're faced with the opportunity to have to do it. And I had a conversation with a special forces guy. He was 10th group special forces for the Green Berets, and he ended up having to use combatives, and he had to push his thumb through a guy's eye. And he said that just prior to it going into the guy's eye, he was all in. And then when he felt it squish and explode in his fingers, he got nauseous. I mean, this is a special forces guy, and having to do this to save his own life, and that reality of what he was actually doing, hitting home with him. And in that heat of battle where he's trying to save his own life, he even got squeamish at the feeling and texture of the eye, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that the average person doesn't consider. You know, they walk around with this idea that, well, I'm a black belt, I can do anything. I would absolutely defend myself at all costs. But we still have.
And statistically, that's not true. Mm-hmm. What they find in looking at fights, guys tend to fight clean.
Yeah.
You know, who fights the dirtiest are women. You know, they will, because they don't know anything about fighting. And so when they hear, you know, claw eyes and rip ears and stuff like that, fish hook, they tend to naturally do, because that's what they've been told to do. Where guys tend to have more of a sense of fair play when they fight.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at actual fights, what do people honestly do in real fights, which we have that information to us more so now than ever before. Big Brother's watching. I mean, there's a camera everywhere. Every cell phone's a camera, video. So we have more real world data about what really happens in real fights. And you don't see that kind of stuff happening. The average person, and it goes back, the average guy is 4,000 times less effective in a fight than what he thinks he's going to be. Everybody's got that idea. But to perpetrate real violence on somebody goes against, unless you're, and hey, look, the sociopaths live and they walk among us. So that's the hard part.
We're training them over here, man.
Yeah. Well, that's the hard part, though, is that if you don't have that capacity, for violence or haven't really thought about it and tried to bring it out, there's a good chance you won't.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do you think that a big piece of that is that once the human element of reality kicks in, like we still naturally don't want to harm our fellow man? Do you think that maybe like somewhere back here in the amygdala or something, where?
No, I think that's part of our human experience. And then and the scary part is that there's a lot of people that don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Ted Bundy. We can go on.
Dahmer.
Mitchell Hall. I think there's a certain point when you realize, like, I've probably done enough. You know what I'm saying? And when you have to go that extra mile to like actually kill somebody because they're not going to stop, then I think that's whenever you're like, I have to force myself now. Like, it's like shooting a dead, or like a horse that's dying, and then you just need to put it out of its misery. It's like, oh shit, now I have to do this, I've never killed anybody though, so I don't know.
Me either.
Yeah, I broke a guy's foot one time and got up like shaking my hands about to throw up off the mat. It was in a tournament. I'm like, ew. So we've talked a little bit about the gouging the eyes. I can't talk about that without thinking about so the podcast, the Rough and Tumble Podcast, we found the name from a style of fighting called American Rough and Tumble. And I think I had told you a little bit about it.
Yeah, you did. I remember you telling me about that.
And these motherfuckers would their goal was to gouge an eye out. That was the KO. That was the knockout. So the moral of the story is we all need to start training more American Rough and Tumble more often.
Yeah. That's where the real, like you were talking about ripping an ear off. Like that's such a strange concept to commit to, because it can be done, obviously, but it's like, I think whenever the reality of how difficult body parts are to pull off the body, when we were doing that lab where we were stabbing, we found that you can do a lot of damage to the skin, but it takes a lot more effort to do damage to an organ, to actually penetrate through the rib cage, to actually penetrate through the chest plate and things like that, and that's what we found in that lab was with most of the devices we were using for improvised weapons, they were all superficial wounds. They weren't anything that would actually dispatch the human from this earth, and that was something that was what I found surprising. With the screwdriver, though, it pretty much found its way in there every time. So
I had the guy that taught me how to throw knives, taught me with screwdrivers. And I saw him throw a slot tip screwdriver through the radiator of a car.
Oh, shit.
And you could, and I used to have one of my old gyms, I had a solid core door. Which you can get. It's not the hollow ones, solid door. Used to keep out back. We'd go back there and would throw screwdrivers and throw various knives and stuff. But if you could throw a screw, because you can keep a screwdriver in your car and nobody's going to get onto you about it.
I got one in my car right now.
Yeah, me too.
I was willing to bet Mr. Jing has a lot more than just a screwdriver in there.
Yeah,
how much practice do you think it would take to catch a bullet with your teeth?
I think what's going to happen is that the learning curve.
It depends on if it's coming out of a gun or not.
I know.
I
guess maybe
you throw it at me like it's popcorn.
Yeah.
I guess either you do or you don't.
Yeah. You don't get a second chance. That's the whole thing.
It always reminds me of an old quote from an interview they did with an explosive ordnance disposal guy for one of our EOD guys, and they asked him, how do you remain calm under such pressure when you're diffusing IEDs and bombs? And he said that he goes, either I'm right or suddenly it's not my problem anymore.
Yeah.
I was like, so there's no pressure there,
No.
There's no wrong. You're just dead.
Don't second guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the things too that I think is just I've always really appreciated about the way that you teach in your self-defense stuff, in your defensive tactics, like the classes that we've done, is I always come back with an understanding of the application of maybe more traditional techniques, how they were supposed to be applied. I've talked about it before where you were mentioning, I think it was like, karate chop to the neck. Like, obviously, I'm not just going to start karate chopping everybody. But if you replace that motion with a sword in your hand, now that suddenly becomes really, really deadly and useful. Mm-hmm. And when you're practicing those kind of motions, you're not practicing necessarily to block somebody's punch like this or to karate chop somebody to death. Jesus. I just karate chopped this table. You're
See, that's the greatest thing about martial artists is that they can't talk without we have sound effects and visual.
Trucks on the store without moving your hands.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
But I've always appreciated that about the way that you teach. I've always gained a deeper understanding of the history of martial arts when I'm training with you.
Well, I appreciate that. What has happened too is you look at in the commercialization when I think Taekwondo has really got a bum rap, and it became a victim of its own commercial success, in that in people's desire to earn a living or to make money or to capitalize on popularity, they started putting people out there that had no business teaching. Mm-hmm. We look at it in 2.5, people were getting their black belts in 2.5 years. And I'm like, okay, in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, you probably just got your blue belt.
Yeah.
you know? And so and I tell my guys, and because we follow the ethos of the style, and it's like, and it takes a lot longer than that to get a black belt in my gym, and even in Taekwondo, but in Taekwondo, you get a black belt, you're considered a serious student. Mm-hmm. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you get a black belt, you're considered a professor. Yeah. And it's, it's like that 8, 10, 12-year journey. I mean, now, the average person, anywhere between 8 and 12 years. I'm going to say, I know there's guys that have taken a lot longer. I know there's some people that have done a little bit faster, but, the 10 years, a median kind of thing. You're so much deeper into the art. Well, in some of these traditional styles and the traditional stand-up styles, you had guys that they haven't been doing it long enough to really understand what the hell it is that they were doing. They don't have the same kind of perspective on their art. And then the further from the source, the muddier the stream. You start losing those little things. And then I just went to a shooting school. It was taught by a guy, it was SF, that had been over in Iraq and Afghanistan and was a serious shooter. Like, nothing that he taught was theoretical and talk about, doing people in. Well, this guy for our government, when the government absolutely positively needed somebody to disappear from the face of the earth, they sent him and his team. Right. Well, that's who I want to learn shooting from. Somebody's actually done it. Well, you got people out there that are training fighting and learning self-defense from people that have never, ever fought or defended themselves.
Yeah. So let me, and I think it's awesome that you said that. So I kind of wanted to talk about that, I guess, since you brought it up. How important is it? And I know it's a double-edged sword to say, well, you can know self-defense without having never been in a fight. However, in your opinion, if you're an instructor who's teaching self-defense, how important do you think it is for that instructor to at least have, if they haven't been in a fight, but at least have competitive, at least a lineage of competitive experience of applying that information?
I think the lineage is probably the most important factor. So I've never shot anybody with my handgun or shot anybody with my AR, but in my lineage of training, I've sought out guys through governmental means, through the military or whatever, absolutely have. So, and I try to make sure that I'm updating my training in that. And yet, I hope I'm never put in a situation where I have to shoot somebody with a gun.
Sure.
As much the same could be saying for unarmed, kind of combat, is that at some point in your training experience, you know, it's hard to say, you know, what's going to happen until you have stroked somebody and then you realize, wow, I just hit this guy as hard as I could and nothing happened. I can remember the first time that happened to me in one of my kickboxing matches. First fight, I skip across the ring and I hit this guy as hard as I possibly could. And I really expected him to disappear in a cloud of red mist. And nothing happened, you know? I mean, and at that point in time, in my career, I thought that was pretty demoralizing because I was like, man, my coach said this will kill a man and he don't look dead.
He don't look dead.
And then I reframed over time to where, you know, my job wasn't to knock him out. My job was to continue to hit him as long as he was there. And so instead of losing confidence, when you hit somebody as hard as you can and nothing happens, especially when you first start, man, it's demoralizing. You know, I mean, it breaks your confidence. Now, you know, you're not fighting from a good place. So for me to contextually rephrase that, I was like, oh, good. You're a tough guy. I'm here all day. So I kind of got like, all right, man, I've been training to whoop you for 3 rounds and I'm going to get all 3 rounds. And then I almost wanted to be disappointed when they laid down because that meant legally I had to quit beating on you. So that's contextually rephrasing what your job is.
Sure.
But it kept you, it kept, so now, I mean, you to hit somebody and they don't go away, then, and when we're training and going back to why it's so important to have people that you at least train under that have actually been there and done that, have been in real live altercations, be it in the street, be it in the ring, whatever, is to be able to to give that kind of advice of like, look, there's some bad, tough people out there, man. I mean, I've seen guys with no training take serious amounts of punishment and they were still there. They were durable. I mean, you know, go to any of the amateur MMA fights and watch 2 guys that have little to no experience and they get in there and they've got it's I think the amateur MMA guys that have no fights or one fight, it's so much more raw because of the amount of adrenaline, you know, that guy's got. I mean, you know, it's...
Plus, I think the reason that they're there also when you look at that, because, you know, you've trained professional fighters, you've been around professional fighters for a long time, and we've got a couple of them at our gym as well. And when you're an 0-0 guy on your first fight, you're there not to embarrass yourself in front of your girlfriend. And so your motivation to not quit and look like an idiot is stronger. And then when you get into the professional realms, now you're there because you're like, I'm going to do this for a job. Like this, I'm going to my job now, and now I'm going to act as a professional. But those first couple of MMA fights where you're there because you don't want your family to make fun of you when you get off the truck, when you get home, I think is a part of the reason they're so durable, you know, mentally wise, you know, and we've seen it the other way around too. I've seen a lot of guys get in there and go, holy fuck. I did not know this was going to hurt this bad. You know, and they quit immediately, you know?
Yeah. I remember having a guy come into the gym one time. He wanted to box, and we sparred with him. And afterwards he said, Mr. Danny, I thought boxing was all about hitting the other guy. But what I just learned, it's all about that other guy wanting to hit you.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a nice guy, you know, but he had no idea, honestly, what it meant to stand in front of another person that wanted to do physical harm to you, you know, that honestly, and the thing is that really we weren't trying to do that much harm. It was just another day in the gym of sparring, and he had no concept. That's what becomes important. And it amazes me seeing people get taught, and some of the stuff that I see that passes for self-defense can be almost frightening, you know, just because you're thinking, I'm like, wow, the guys I've hit, that's not going to work on, you know. I don't know who you're training and playing with, but the guys we're playing with, they're not going to be impressed by that. So
when you think about women's self-defense and like developing skills for like a women's self-defense class and stuff like that, how important do you think it is? I guess, so I don't want to ask this question and because it's going to come across one way, because it's easy to answer it this one way when we talk about jiu-jitsu and women. But do you think that there's more value in having a woman go through a 2-day course where they're learning guard and triangles and arm locks and things like that, things that have taken us years and years and years to get good at, and or would you focus more on awareness, what we would call SA or situational awareness, where, not necessarily, obviously they should have some hands-on, like, okay, this is how I at least get out from underneath somebody, but overall, developing the awareness of knowing how to identify things that just don't seem right in a situation.
So here's how, because I get asked a lot to teach these, self-defense classes. And, hey, we want you to come in and do a self-defense seminar. We got this group, that group.
You should go to the one that he teaches in Brazil. It's considerably more intense than the rest of them.
Yeah. It's a little different.
Mr. Dring tried to stab me. Threw me and
tried to stab me. I was wondering where you got it from.
I did stab you, yeah.
But I'll ask whoever's asking me to do that. I go, well, because we want you to teach some techniques. I'm go, let me ask you a question. You ride a bike as a kid growing up? Yeah. Ride a bike a lot? Yeah. Would you bet me 10 grand on a bike race right now from here to Conway? Now? No. Well, did you swim as a kid? Yeah. Swim a lot? Oh, yeah. If I dropped you a mile from shore, do you think you could make it to shore? Oh, man, I don't know. And I go, well, if you wouldn't bet your life or bet your money on activities that you did for hours and hours and hours, why would you bet your life on 2 hours or an hour of training against somebody who's drunk on drugs, not wired right in the head? Murphy's Law says going to be bigger and stronger. What makes you think that's going to work?
Right.
So, and it's kind of like, man.
Chi energy.
Yeah. So everybody wants the easy out. It's the bigger, better deal, and that's why people can sell. Everybody wants to think, man, I just learned, I'm going to learn this magic technique, and it's going to be, and there's so many factors. The psychological factor, having somebody that's drunk on drugs, not wired right in the head, wanting to do violence that absolutely cares not about you, doesn't care about legal ramifications, doesn't care about having to go to court. Doesn't, a lot of times good people also view, what are the ramifications and what happened? And predators don't have those same kind of concepts, precepts, right? And so, and it goes back, nature versus nurture. There's just some people that are wired, male or female. Man, they're wired for war. But they're not typically the ones that need the self-defense class, and so the ones that honestly need to learn. So when I go in, I feel like, okay, giving you some awareness and avoidance tools, and in playing the when then. I hate what if, or if then. If implies it's never going to happen. Like, if I win the lottery, then I'm going to go buy a Learjet. Well, I've never been jet shopping. I've never but if I go, when I'm at the gas station and a guy comes up to me trying to, take money from me, then I'm going to do X, Y, Z. So when then is much more powerful thinking. And giving people some awareness and avoidance tools is something that you can do in an hour or 2 hours. You can talk about it. Now, whether or not they're going to actually practice or employ those, all you can do is kind of sow those. And I can tell people, we've talked about gouging eyes, right? And you can tell everybody and their dog, oh yeah, stick your thumb in the eye. But having the wherewithal, like if a guy that's SF that has been training to shoot guns and use knives, and that kind of he has been trained, can have a visceral reaction to doing it. What do you think about, your Aunt Betty that has never done anything to anybody at any time? And you can tell that lady, oh, yeah. But then her having the speed, the timing, the confidence, and the courage to do that without regularly training. And we all know, man, our jiu-jitsu skills are perishable. Like,
oh, absolutely.
You're not going to forget the basics, but your sense of timing, your sense of, unfortunately have gone through a ton of injuries. I can list all these things I've done, but it's wrecked my body, over the years. So I know what it's like to try to claw your way back onto the mat. And every time it's like, oh man, you see stuff and you don't get quite to it. People, little things that you could do, you can't do. And that's just somebody that's been doing it forever. Can you imagine somebody that only had a day?
Right.
You know, it's so difficult. I work with the sheriff's department. I'm a reserve with Pulaski County. I've got something years, and a lot of years with the county in, and I've done defensive tactics. So I try to make sure that I'm staying on top of relevant trends, things that are going on, updating and because everything evolves, right? And threats evolve.
Crime evolves.
Do what?
Yeah, crime evolves. How
crime
people are
evolved. Yeah,
committing
everything,
crimes,
you know. So ongoing training, and we know more, again, because Big Brother's watching, we know more about the actual kinds of attacks and how things occur. And so going out there and working with, and, you know, they'll send, oh, here, 4 hours. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do in 4 hours? You know, I mean, I do some avoidance. I can teach some positional stuff, and it's, and everybody thinks they're going to learn some really crazy cool stuff. And I'm like, dude, in 4 hours, like, you're not taking guns away from people day in, day out. Mm-hmm. You're not doing knife disarms day in, day out. You're not, you know, but what you are doing is you're coming into contact with people. So I try to focus my training into what are you actually going to do day in, day out? Let me tell you what's going to help you out is maintaining distance. Mm-hmm. And it's that's not like a major, oh, this is really cool martial artsy stuff. No, it's real. It's like, if I keep enough distance and I'm really aware of how close you are to me at all times, I'm less likely to get sucker punched in the face. I'm less likely to get football tackled on the ground. Mm-hmm. And I've got a better chance of getting to the tools that I wear around my waist. And that is so simple. And everybody's almost disappointed when I teach that because they think that I'm going to, you know, and I'm looking at them going, no.
Most of us already know the answer.
Yeah.
It's like when people say, like, they say it as a joke, like, you turn around and run away. It's like, yeah. Do that. Like, you don't want to be in that fight. Turn around and run away.
Yeah. But it's not what they want to hear.
Right.
No. And you talk about distance, and you're right. So my dad's retired law enforcement as well. And we would refer to it as the 6 foot reactionary gap, at least during, you know, his time as a defensive tactics guy. And then even in the combatives program, we utilize an exercise of that very nature where we call projectile range is one of the ranges that we deal with guns and knives and things like that. And we'll do an exercise where one person has a knife, one person has a gun. They start 10 feet apart, and the person with the gun has to draw and shoot, and the person with the knife has to stab. Well, as you get closer and closer and closer, that projectile item becomes completely useless. You know, within 3 feet, you're getting stabbed before you can ever pull your holster. Mm-hmm. And so understanding that as well, because there's a lot of people that walk around that think, well, I've got a gun.
So that was originally done. It's called the Tooler rule, which wasn't really, it's never official rule, but a guy named Tooler brought in. Now, here the funny part is that, you know, another Bruce Lee reference, Dan Inosanto was the guy closing the gap. Right. But they found 21 feet. So I was at a plainclothes response to violent encounters class, and they had one of the bob dummies, and then they had a bob set up, and then at 21 feet behind the line. So one person standing here with a knife, another guy, timer, beep, draw the gun, shoot, and notice how I shot over my mic.
Don't shoot into the mic.
You got to do hands.
Thank you. They're kind of expensive.
Yeah, they're $42.
Yeah. So
a piece.
Almost everybody made it and slashed the throat of the bob before the gun went off.
Really?
Yeah.
Within 21 feet.
21 feet. So it was amazing. A 20 foot, and there were a couple that got a shot off just as the guy was going there. Mm-hmm. But handguns are notoriously poor man stoppers, and unless you're really hitting, like, you know, maybe severing the spinal cord, you're probably not stopping that guy's forward momentum. Yeah. And there's a really good chance, unless you're getting off the X, moving and shooting, which a lot of people don't do when there's a threat coming at them. Mm-hmm. Like, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, just move and shoot. You'd be surprised how few people actually move and shoot when they're firing. Would have still got stabbed. And I thought it was interesting. If you watch the old, there's you can still find that original experiment. Well, Inosanto was a sprinter, and he ran for, I don't know, SoCal or maybe it was UCLA. He was a sprinter, like, and had a crazy, crazy 100-yard. Yeah. And so, like, he was ruining these guys. In addition to being a crazy good knife guy, he was crazy fast. Really, really ignorantly quick. So, but that's where a lot of that came from, and they still work on that. So when you're talking reactionary gap, that and guns and knives, there's a lot of really interesting studies that are out there, and you can look up that on YouTube and see all kinds of people doing it with airsoft. And
how often are people like pulling out a knife at 21 feet away though? Like if I'm going to pull out my knife, it's going to be at 3 feet away where I can use it.
And that's, and you're not wrong about that. And Mr. Dring, we mentioned it earlier, we talked about CCT, like the closed circuit television gives us that. And the reality is,
I see a couple of situations.
Yeah, there's
getting out of my car,
a large amount of situations where you've got guys running around crowds with not, it's not as common, obviously, but I think it's more of a point to reference or a proof to reference that it takes a couple of seconds. If you were to tell someone, okay, draw, it takes seconds for that to go here to here to here, and then still acquiring a target sight picture and all that stuff. Whereas with, we've grown up our entire lives slinging our hands around, and all we're doing is putting something in it and slinging it around.
I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty lately, so I feel like my reaction speed is just on point right now.
It is weird that you and I have the exact same amount of combat tours, and you're not in the military.
I've been spending the same amount of hours. War happens when we just run around in a circle and shoot everybody on the map, right?
Yep, that's exactly what it looks like. And then there's a time limit in every single battle zone. So.
Okay, time's up, guys. Let's get it. Bring it back in.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and you mentioned, man stoppers and using guns as man stoppers, stuff like that. Even us, when we qualify on our weapons, for the longest time, we would do the 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. And they've actually started kind of getting away from that. And when we're doing the combatives piece, now we're actually teaching to shoot to the hip girdle, where you basically, the idea is that you're not going to kill them. Most likely you're not. We carry NATO 9mm, so we're not probably going to kill anyone with that off of an initial shot. But if we can shatter the pelvic girdle and drop them, that's the idea, is to neutralize the threat, not necessarily dispatch the threat.
And even you're not wearing a plate carrier over your groin. And even if there is any kind of material there, Kevlar bib, so to speak, you're being punched in that lower viscera. It's going to hurt.
Yes.
It's going to start breaking you. It's going to start breaking you down. Yeah.
So we had researched a martial art called 52 blocks that had been developed in
prison system.
Yeah, the prison systems. The next time Mitch is going to get up and walk all the way over here and grab his drink it, and then come back and put it down. But we found it really, really interesting because most of the moves that they focused on were things like isolating limbs, like stabbing the arm, like making sure that they weren't going to be able to stab you. Because in reality, if I were going to kill somebody with a shank that I had in a prison cell, it's probably going to take me a while. And I don't have a while. I've got to make sure that you can't stab me and kill me. And I'm going to try and bleed you out, and so a lot of the attacks were like to the armpit, or there were some to the legs and stuff like that, a lot to the groin, a lot of moves to protect the groin and stuff like that. I found it really interesting.
I was watching one night, late at night, and it was prison video, and it was of guys actually getting stabbed in prison. And there was no warning. A guy will walk up, and he's got it hidden behind his leg, and then boom, 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 ice pick, stab him. And you're just coming up like this, and a 45-degree angle of insertion up underneath the rib cage, looking to puncture the aorta, and you're, boom, dropping. And every single one of them were violent, and they were very, very fast. And it was one of those things that you start looking at, and, everybody's got their nifty, knife defenses. And yet, man, when you start looking at that and just, the violent reality, and it's the unexpectedness, it's not like there's a referee going, "Are you ready?
Right.
Are you ready?" It's not like that. Even when you go into knife training, you know what you're there to do. It's, can you be visiting with somebody, turn around, and then go from 0 to 100? That's the hard part. None of us, that's the hardest part about actually being able to employ anything that you do, is that it is very difficult unless you've got Kato hiding in your closet that's going to arbitrarily jump out at you when you go home. Going from 0 to 100 without any chance of warming up, without having any idea, because that's typically what happens. And you can divide all self-defense scenarios into one of two types. It's either going to be a spontaneous attack or a confrontation. Spontaneous attack would be, like what I'm talking about, obviously.
It means you need to practice how you treat people, and they won't spontaneously attack you.
Yeah. Well, you open up your door and somebody's inside your home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's funny because working with law enforcement, the number one thing people do when they find somebody, come out of their bedroom and there's somebody in their living room, or they walk in, park their car and they come in their house and there's somebody there. The number one thing people do is
freeze.
No, they engage them in conversation. What are you doing here?
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
You really don't. That's not a time to
How are you doing?
Yeah.
You need a glass of water?
It's not time to talk. The confrontation is what's more difficult. Statistically, that's what happens more. More likely, you're going to be in some sort of a confrontation, and being able to recognize pre-attack indicators, is really huge. That's where maintaining your reactionary gap. But then you have the normal person is probably not looking to engage, whereas the other person may be looking to engage. And you start running into, those society norms that we were talking about earlier. And so, even then, the confrontation gives you a clue, but then it happens really, really fast. So that changes up. How you respond to your training. One of the camps that I ran not too long ago, on the second day, I told everybody just show up in their street clothes. Wear what you normally wear. It's different if you've always worn your pajamas.
Yeah.
You're
that's exactly what Jonny wears every day.
Yeah.
You got your put on your boots, put on your shoes, wear your jeans, wear what you normally wear. And all of a sudden, your rolling feels different, your punching feels different, your kicking feels different. And it has a big difference. And all martial arts evolved because of their environment. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, one-on-one competition on the mat, it's without peer. You do that same one-on-one competition in gravel on uneven terrain, and it may not be, on a rocky hillside. Jumping guard may not be what you want to do.
Right.
There's environments.
But
environments
on the beach,
dictate.
you can.
Yeah. In the beach, if you're in Brazil, it's beautiful. The Ozark Mountains, maybe not so much. And it's the same thing. Kicking, if you're in a rice field water up to your waist, you're not good doing a lot of kicking, but that hourglass stance from a Wing Chun thing may be more about like what you want to do. And so wearing a lot of heavy clothes, if you're in a cold weather environment, mountains in Japan, and you're wearing a lot of clothes, punching and kicking, it's hard to punch when you've got lots of clothes on. You grab somebody, and that's where your judo all of a sudden,
you're right.
That throw right there becomes, hyper effective. It's like, in the jungles of Malaysia, the Salat styles with some of their funky stances. You look at that and you're like, well, man, if you're on a jungle trail and there's vines everywhere, how you move in that environment is going to be different than how you're going to move when you're on the beach.
I had heard, and I don't know how true this is, but I had heard that Savat, the martial art Savat, was developed for fighting on a ship. That a lot of it was like you were holding onto a handrail as you kick somebody in the head because the boat's rocking back and forth. If there's any legitimacy?
I think there is, because for some reason, because it was a French martial art, and I believe it was like a French Foreign Legion thing. I want to say it came from their Navy. It makes sense for some reason.
Yeah, man, not going to, if I can't verify, I'm when I say something, but that rings bells.
Yeah, it's
it really
so
does.
interesting how I was discussing this the other day at the gym, like Lethway. Have you ever seen Lethway? It's basically Muay Thai with headbutts. And I've always wondered, like, if you were to isolate a lot of these martial arts, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if we just left it alone for longer, what would it turn into? If we just isolated Lethway and just let that evolve without any outside influence.
So here's what's interesting about Lethway is that Dr. Monji, Dr. G had the first kickboxing school in America. And he was a Bando, Burmese Lethwei, Burmese boxer. And so he was he was pretty much the mentor for the Joe Louis fighting systems. Joe fought in Madison Square Garden, and Dr. G, I think, was fought on the undercard at the age of about 45. I mean, he was in his late 40s, and he was still, competing in the ring. And that, so the first kickboxing school technically was a Lethwei, it was a Burmese boxing. Was a Burmese boxing schools, which I think, trivia for 10. And Dr. G's, we would had us doing focus mitt work with our headbutts.
We've done some of that. I've done some of that with you.
Boom. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that came from the Lethwei.
Okay.
And so that's where that came from. And then the dropping knees and, doing the takedowns and then dropping on knees, dropping elbows, doing the headbutt work. And that all came from Dr. G. So it was really interesting training with him because that was the Burmese boxing and the Lethwei makes Muay Thai look really civilized.
Right.
I mean, in Thai boxing is downright violent. I got to go to Rajadamnern Stadium when I was in Bangkok and watch some Thai fights. Man, they were carrying boys. I mean, it was incredible. They had the band playing. It was really cool for me personally to get to be there and watch the fights. And but man, they were dropping. I mean, they were dropping fools. It was great.
In the early part of your career, so what year did you start getting serious about martial arts? Like what around what time was that?
79.
79. So in the 70s and 80s, what was the stupidest shit you ever saw? Like seminar wise, like some guys coming through the network saying, "Hey, you guys need to come out here and check out this thing I'm doing." You know what I mean? Because I can imagine you were going to a lot of seminars, a lot of reaching out, traveling for a lot of education and stuff. But like, what was some of the dumbest shit?
Well, I don't know.
Like,
dumb
I want to
stuff.
know.
I zoned out for a second and came back just on that. What was some dumb shit?
Let's break it down. There was a lot of crazy stuff in the AOK. So I graduated from North Little Rock Northeast, and I went down to Baylor. I went to start my college career, Waco, Texas. And while I was down there, I trained a little bit in Shotokan and went fighting on the AOK circuit. Well, some of the old school martial art guys, Demetrius Savanas, Ray McCallum. Saw Ray McCallum showed up, and at this time, like uniforms were optional.
Okay.
And it was bare knuckle, groin kicks were legal. If you hit the ground, you still had you could follow up. So if you swept somebody, they went to the ground, you could punch them. If y'all both fell to the ground, you could punch and kick each other. The groin kicks, I saw people get kicked, cups broken out from underneath people. You'd go backstage and somebody's there with their man business on a bag of ice, really not loving life.
Yeah.
So that was pretty interesting. I saw Ray McCallum was talking to the crowd. I think it was in Killeen, Texas. And he had shown up with a bunch of his boys on motorcycles and came in. And he's talking like I'm talking to you guys, whipping this dude. And this guy threw a sidekick and he rolled into the dude's base leg and back fisted him in the groin while he's having a conversation. And I was like, dude, that was sick. Man? I mean, that is like, you're not even in the same neighborhood in terms of skill level. I mean, he was so far ahead. And that's what you would see in some of those old school tournaments is that you'd have guys that were recreational.
Yeah.
I mean, they trained, a couple of times a week and had earned a black belt. And then there were these guys that were traveling the country that were just straight up killers. Mm-hmm. And they would go through and pull, highlight reel stuff. And this is before you could have a highlight reel,
right?
Would pull off some crazy stuff. And the old school challenges, we had, people from various styles would come in. Dojo rating was something totally different back then.
Yeah.
You'd have guys, come in and from this style,
pretending to be cops.
Style. Yeah.
that was what happened in the Count Dante Dojo Wars. Is they first of all they used dynamite on somebody's dojo. Like they got caught taping dynamite to their dojo. I'm like, You're telling me you're the deadliest man on the fucking planet, and you just went and strapped dynamite to their building, and then they had to pretend to be cops to bust in on them.
One of the dojo storms they showed up pretending to be cops and then just started beating everybody up.
If you really think that you're the deadliest man on the planet, you
just walk in and be yourself.
Everyone should die around you.
There's some of the greatest people I've ever met. Honestly, I mean, really, really good human beings been through the martial arts. And some of the craziest people I've ever met have been through the martial arts. And it's just one of those things that just the nature of the beast is that this is a section that draws a lunatic fringe.
So, I'll mention him by name because I do have a lot of respect for this guy. So I'm not saying anything bad about him. But you mentioned Gokor Chivichian earlier. And Max Bishop being one of the local guys. I'll say it out loud. That guy was one of the craziest motherfuckers I ever met in my life. He tried to fight me one time, and I was a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, 23 years old, and I didn't know why I made him mad. But I say that with respect because I do.
It sounds like it.
Because he's still out there.
And I still
pretty
fear
sure
him,
he doesn't listen to the podcast.
And that he doesn't. He's still training mules up in North Arkansas somewhere. But the reality is, business aside and all that, but just martial arts in general, the guy was a plethora of knowledge and he was a little crazy. Like I will say that, and you guys don't have to say it and that's fine. But I think that was what was kind of appealing about him was that he had that appeal. And so when he would teach martial arts to people, there's a small group of people that are looking for that exact type of person. Yeah. And he was able to provide it,
I love Max, and for all the reasons you just mentioned.
Yes.
And he, when I put on my first show, it was populated by a lot of his guys because he was one of the few people that could train an MMA fighter. And
do well.
And back in the early days, especially. And then, and he spent time with Gokar and Gene LaBelle, had Henzo in. I mean,
he was a hoist black belt as well.
Yeah, anytime I see Henzo, he asks me about, if I've seen Max. And then Jeff Mullins out of Memphis. Now Jeff's athletic commissioner now in Nevada, and Jeff brought in more high level grapplers into the Memphis area to do seminars before anybody. I mean, I went to a lot of seminars at Jeff's school. I actually went to a lot of seminars at Max's school, because those guys were bringing people in. I mean, they were actually, bringing grapplers in, they were bringing guys in, they were doing the seminars, they were putting their guys into the ring. And so really in the Mid-South, I mean, Jeff, Max, myself, there were only a few of us that were like actually, training fighters and putting guys in a ring or in a cage. I mean, a lot of my early shows, it was more like pride in that we were fighting in a ring, before I had a cage, and we had.
And I know Max was putting on those smokers also, basically I'd hear stories. I don't know how true they are, but I'd hear stories about, up in Paragould and stuff, these putting on these shows and two guys are supposed to fight. One guy doesn't show up. So they're like, hey, anybody in the crowd want to jump up here and get up involved?
And dude, that wasn't just Max. That was all across the state.
Yeah, that was how I got my first fight.
That's crazy.
I almost fought twice in the same day.
That's crazy.
There were a lot. I mean, like, I came in at the tail end of probably all the craziness, all the unorganized, and and it was getting organized, and there was still like another side of it where we were fighting in rodeos, and I remember one guy, his fight got canceled, so he went and drank, and then they called him and were like, hey, you got to fight, so he's like, all right, I'll be there. I came back in and fought. Crazy stuff like that would happen all the time, and it still does a little bit, but it's gotten much more professional.
Well, and it's had to, and that's why it came up underneath the athletic commission and got to the point. Like, I used to be able to do shows, and one of the guys, I charge an entry fee. I mean, people pay $100 to go do a jiu-jitsu tournament.
Yep.
They'll pay to go to a karate tournament. Well, I'm like, I'm putting on these small shows, and at the Sherwood Forest or, various venues. I mean,
the Armory. That's
the Armory. Yeah, I fought in the Armory.
I got knocked out cold in the Armory.
I put shows on at the State House Convention Center, Hot Springs Convention Center. We did some larger shows in conjunction with some other things, but and Metroplex put on the first sanctioned professional show at the Metroplex. So, I mean, use different venues, but my most favorite ones were out of the Woody Sherwood Forest. And I mean, trained fighters, pair the fighters. My dad had worked the door. My mom had worked the concession stand. Awesome. We would charge, we were charging like $50 to the guys that were fighting so that, I could pay somebody to put the cage and put the ring up. And I didn't have to it was really almost, I'm not going to say underground, but it was because we were doing, this was before the unified rules even came into existence. There wasn't a lot of bureaucracy and commission involvement. We did 3 rounds. We were doing 3 threes. We had, I was doing, and this is before the main fights were, UFC wasn't even doing rounds yet. Mm-hmm. So we would do 3 3-minute rounds and it was very much at the very beginning. Well, you can't do a small show like that anymore.
No. Yeah.
Just because of all the regulation, it's either go big or go home. So if you're not out there and you're not hustling sponsorships and selling tables and promoting and everything, but it takes away a little bit from some of the amateurness. You're asking guys to go out. It makes it a little bit tougher because MMA guys don't get the same amount of experience before they turn professional that, say, boxers do.
Yeah.
That's tough.
I think a lot of the amateur fighters too now, because of social media, because of things like Instagram and all of that, they want to be treated like they're professional fighters. They want to be on that card. They won't fight on a card that's in a rodeo in the middle of Arkansas that's, on a dirt floor or whatever. But it's like, in actuality, as an amateur, you kind of need that.
Yeah,
you need to go through.
And it becomes the Peter principle in action because they're not greened.
Right.
So they rise their level of incompetency really, really fast,
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense, yeah.
You can have a lot of, and I think it detracts ultimately how good guys can get. So, because you don't get the opportunity to get that experience. You don't get those fight camps over and over and over again, and you got people running up. I had a guy I was trying to get a fight for. He's a blue belt, and a lot of 0-0, 1-0, 0-1, fighters wouldn't fight him because he was a blue belt. And I'm like,
that's wild.
You have got to be kidding me. I was actually shocked. He had a couple of fights fall through, and he's a hard weight to find a fight for, lighter weight guy, but they were like, oh no, he's a blue belt. And I'm like, man, that's nuts. I thought it was, especially in this day and age, with as much jiu-jitsu
it's everywhere.
that there is that the guys that are right now still doing MMA didn't want to fight because he'd had some official training.
Right.
And I'm like, man, that does not bode well for the future of the sport.
Yeah.
Right.
I was kind of a little bit disturbed by that.
Do you see a trend happening in jiu-jitsu or in fighting, MMA, jiu-jitsu, whatever, boxing? Since I've noticed since my time that there'll be trends on how the techniques that are used, the styles that are used, and they kind of go in this circular path where jiu-jitsu comes around and then people start realizing that high-level wrestling can start to shut down jiu-jitsu. Then people start realizing, well, if I have a little bit of wrestling with really good boxing, I don't have to worry about the jiu-jitsu at all. Then the kickboxing comes in, and then the jiu-jitsu kind of comes back around because then they're like, well, if I have good wrestling, then I can take them down and then use my jiu-jitsu. So you see this big circle. Do you notice anything like that happening now?
Yeah. What's interesting, being involved with the athletic because I'm the co-chair of the Arkansas Athletic Commission, and I want to state publicly for the record, I absolutely hate being on the commission. Nobody is happy that you're an athletic commissioner.
I don't think nobody's happy to be on the athletic commission.
No, it's a time vampire. It just latches to your neck and it sucks the life out of your day. But it has to be done, and I feel like somebody that actually knows something. It's amazing how many people can be involved at that level that have never ever been punched in the face.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, they wouldn't know, you know, an arm bar or a heel hook from a right hook. You know, I mean, they have no idea about what's going on. And having a love, I mean, I had a USA Amateur Boxing Club inside my gym. You know, my oldest boy was a state Golden Gloves and Mid-South Golden Gloves boxing. I've worked with professional boxers, MMA fighters, blah, blah, blah. So having a passion for the fighting arts, I think is important. And then having the fighter's best interest at heart and having a fighter's heart is important to have at least somebody like that on the commission. But then you get involved in so many things. It just is like, anyway, the reason why I bring that up is I travel. I get to see a lot of between, you know, cornering people, being around, watching the fight game. And it comes down, I think nowadays it's the consummate game of rock, paper, scissors with the difference. But you've seen over the years, obviously, boxing, Thai boxing, wrestling, Jiu Jitsu. You get a few guys that were traditionalists that, they're just athletic dudes. You know, they're going to be good at whatever they did. You know, I tell people all the time, it's not the song, it's the singer. You know, it wouldn't matter what song I sing, it's going to suck because my ass can't sing.
Yeah.
I can't carry a tune in the wheelbarrow. So it's to a certain extent, you know, you get somebody that's got great timing, is athletic, that is, I mean, it doesn't matter what their core art is. But when they start cross-training, to be able to do MMA, is nobody's coming in from just one perspective anymore. They may be wrestling and boxing. They may be, you know, jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. They could be jiu-jitsu and boxing, but there's going to be some cross-training. What really sets the wrestlers apart and why wrestling has come back into vogue is that they come from a disciplined athletic program. You know, by the time, and I'm not talking about high school wrestlers. I'm talking about guys who make it into college. Sure. Let's talk about the higher level guys. Is that if you came out of a D1 athletic program, what did you have? You had to be there at this time because you're probably on scholarship. If you're a D1, you're on scholarship. So you're going to show up when they say you're going to be at the track at 6 a.m. Your ass was at the track at 6 a.m. When you had a nutritionist because you got to make a weight division, you got people that are also in college that their degree is in nutrition. And so they're helping you out with your diet. You know, when you went to the weight room, it wasn't, you know, your buddy Bob who read, you know, Pumping Iron magazine. You had a guy whose degree was in sports science, who was building your weight training program. So people that come out of the D1 college athletic program that were really serious, man, they are athletically so far above the curve. Yeah. You know, if you had a D1 jiu-jitsu program, our jiu-jitsu would be a different level.
Oh, yeah.
What's his name is trying that? Ricardo Laborio? He's trying to do that in the colleges, start introducing a college program.
Yeah.
And then other countries are putting that into practice. But I know where you're coming from. You're, using it as an example, like if we had a program structured like a D1 school, but for jiu-jitsu or even for, well, I say boxing, but MMA. Boxing, we've got, the academy has boxing, West Point has boxing. You can get it at the collegiate level. One thing I found interesting about the Air Force Academy itself, especially because that's the only experience I have with those types of colleges, is you could box for the academy, but you could have no more than 2 amateur fights in your life to box for the academy. You couldn't go there on scholarship because to them it was an athletic. It was something you could do as an athletic for like a freshman credit. But they had D1 wrestling, and you could go there as a wrestling scholership
with tons of experience.
Yeah. But their boxing program was like kind of a satellite program that they used just as a freshman credit. Right. It was the weirdest thing, And I saw some really shitty boxers.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, they're not wanting somebody that's really, really good to come in and wreck people.
Their boxing is different. They have to train to box inside of an airplane. So they use shorter arms.
Well, I can tell you one thing: when you're training at anything at the Air Force Academy, I got to see the
altitude.
Altitude, it is.
No way,
you motherfucker. So I got to see the Air Force Army boxing when they had the Air Force Army game this past year. And there's a sign on there that says "Welcome to 7,250 feet." And that's a reminder to West Point and those other guys that like it's a big deal. That so even if you're
when that air's that thin,
it is, man. It's a big deal.
I went to Executive Security International. Was in Aspen, Colorado. I did their home study thing. Spent 3 weeks in Aspen, learning to be a bodyguard, and we drove the Dallenbach family. Did the race car driving. We, how to drive convoys and how to get out of ambushes and stuff.
How much is this camp and where do I sign up?
Yeah,
it's a great program.
Yeah. I would love that. That'd be. I'd train to be a bodyguard.
John Farnham was the shooting instructor, so we were shooting in excess of 1,000 rounds a day. I mean, you're spending about 15 hours a day on the range, just from early morning until at night, because so you could get your low light night shooting in. And we did the most important stuff was not any of the fun stuff. Like the fun stuff but it was all the stuff an ex-Secret Service agent guy who protected several presidents. His name was Jack McGeorge, was the one of the primary classroom instructors. And he's like, if you ever have to use anything that you learn that's fun, you suck as a bodyguard.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
You screwed up.
Yeah. And then he proceeded to show slide after slide after slide where, look, because these guys didn't do their advanced work and didn't do their other stuff right. All the slides where the bodyguards died was like really, really important part of that class.
How well do you think a class like that would do as like a recreational class? You could like they do the escape rooms. You could like sign up to do a bodyguard class.
There's a guy named Jason Hansen that's an ex-CIA spy. And he does a camp like that. And it's interesting because some of his marketing is just cheesy as hell, right?
Yeah.
Like you read it and it's like, okay, you're going after the Walter Mitty crowd. You know what I mean? This group that you're going after. But his content is really off the chain. Like, I mean, the content of what he's selling, like I think his marketing is really bogus, but his product, I mean, the information that he's putting out on cybersecurity and protecting your bank account information and, being able to, in traveling, if somebody's trying to pick you up as a target and a lot of the situational awareness stuff we were talking about earlier, his education on that stuff is fantastic. I've got 3 or 4 of his books. I've got his stuff coming into my inbox.
It's just the delivery.
Yeah, I mean the marketing. It's just the marketing of it. But he does have like a spy camp where they teach you how to get out of, like if somebody's wrapped you up in duct tape, how to break that, or how to get out of.
That'd be an awesome like Valentine's date idea.
Yeah,
right. Like go learn how to get out of zip ties.
And he's proud of it too. Like it's like a $10,000 camp that you're going to, and they teach evasive car maneuvers and the driving and all of that.
You talking about the cheesy marketing reminds me of I recently waged war against a certain Taekwondo association that I won't.
I noticed that. I noticed that on your Instagram.
If you want to find out, you can follow me on Instagram and follow all the drama there. But it got me started. Like I started just Googling like random Taekwondo schools throughout the nation just to because I wanted to go through their Google reviews. I didn't find. For this particular association, I didn't find a single one that didn't have 1-star reviews. And one of them cracked me up because these people were like, yeah, we signed up for like 6 months and then the instructor just disappeared. We never saw him again. Like we were in class that day and he just didn't show up. Nobody knows we haven't heard from him. School's still there. Nobody goes there anymore.
Dude, that's so wild.
There's just like so many weird things like that. There's another one that happened in Little Rock of a guy that apparently had a room specifically dedicated to paddling children, and then would take them in and paddle.
Yeah.
Alarms go off to me there though, because like, what do you do? You dropping your kids off and just like, okay, bye, and like no parents are in there watching this person take a child into another room and like choose a paddle.
Well, the thing is
everybody's okay with that?
They may not be okay with it, but I think the large majority of the people who are staying and seeing it don't want to say anything. It's
so weird.
It's one of those things
and
where
if you're set up to take care of disadvantaged youth whose maybe their parents aren't coming in, that and I'm unfortunately well aware of the school and the person you're talking about.
I probably figured you did.
And it's it's just horribly sad.
Yeah.
I mean, and stuff like that gives everybody in the martial arts a black eye because unfortunately to the uninitiated, we all get lumped in.
Right.
I mean, we all kind of get lumped in with that. And then, you hear stuff like that and you're just like, how does that exist?
Yeah.
You know, I don't get it. You know, I mean, I really don't. It's just like in being older, you know, I know it's a little harder for me to be lean and panther-like. You know, age, injury, it comes in. I still have a passion and want to share knowledge and share experience. And, you know, Father Time is undefeated.
Yeah, he really is.
I mean, you know,
You're not wrong.
It just is. But yet, you know, I mean, I still do my push-ups and pull-ups. I'm out there on the mat. I can't do everything, but I'm trying to do what I can. And I see these guys that look like you don't have the discipline to push your ass away from the table.
Right.
How are you purporting to teach any kind of discipline at all when you can't take care of yourself?
All ASIC gis and black belts, you know. Speaking of,
I've said
you're
it
talking about that particular story. One of my coaches made a comment one time.
I told somebody. Wait. We never told the story about your other coach. Did that ever flesh out?
So
can we tell that story?
So I don't know because I don't know all the details and I don't want to be the one.
Well, let's make some up. Who cares?
What I do know is that he supposedly is training in Shreveport right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so he's actually training at someone else's gym.
All right, so maybe it cleared up, and maybe
I don't know that it cleared up.
Bring it up, and we'd be completely
and
wrong.
I know the story of what you speak to.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I do, unfortunately.
I was excited to.
So I don't know.
Share that drama.
I'm happy for the guys who are still remaining at the gym, who are keeping it going. They're doing a good job, and I've heard that they've done some really good job at changing the culture in that gym. And if the story's true, then excuse my language, but fuck the guy. You know?
Yeah.
But going back to that ATA, oops. Am I supposed to say that?
I'll say it is ATA. You guys can come after me.
So speaking of that story, though, one of my coaches made a joke one time that said one of our new slogans was for the gym was going to be "Come train with us. We haven't been sued."
Yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that the bottom line is like people just need to be, again, situational awareness. Like, be aware of what you're putting your children into.
Well, dude,
there's
in
an
Cabot,
instance
they
where,
had. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's an instance where in Centerton, the police had like there was a rape case or something that happened to a child. It was horrible. But then afterwards, they posted something that was basically blaming the victim. Like, hey, maybe you should think about not leaving your child with a male unattended that you don't know.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you should think about making that post a little bit separated from the charge.
No, you're absolutely right. And
you're right, but don't attach it to this
you
charge.
Can't. There's a fine line between personal responsibility and then teetering on the verge of victim blaming. You know?
Yeah, right. And I'm not trying. That's not what I'm trying to do.
I get it. But I think I may have told this story on the podcast before. I don't know. Johnny will let me know. Because he makes sure to remind me every time. But when in Cabot, we had a situation happen with a martial arts school there where one of the instructors was doing very illegal things with children, right? And they had proven it to be the case and everything like that. And I used to own a gym in Cabot, and at the time, so I went into my unit. I wasn't at work that day, but my squadron commander came into the office one day, and while I wasn't there, and was like, "Hey, did you guys hear about that whole thing that went down in Cabot at that martial arts school?" And a couple of guys were like, "No, we don't," And he goes, "That wasn't Mitch, was it?" And I was like, "What do you mean it wasn't? Was it me? What kind of thing you think I'm doing around here?" But no, it wasn't me. But yeah,
just to clear my name,
so we're clear,
it wasn't me. Don't worry about
me.
it. Don't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. It's not a big deal. It wasn't me.
But I mean, that's almost a sign of the times. It doesn't matter if you're a cop, a clergy.
Yeah.
The whole Catholic Church and other elements of the clergy, politicians. I mean,
I think that
no segment of the population that is immune from having, assholes like to do something like that to a child.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm just like, man. And yet it happens, you know what I mean? And it's horrible. It just is really disturbing.
I think the moral of the story is don't necessarily believe that martial artists are of any higher character
than the average person.
Anybody else.
Absolutely.
Well,
just because of the belt that's strapped around
and this
the
is
waist.
something that I get on my horse about, and I'm going to ride it right now.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Is when people go, Jiu Jitsu will make you better, martial arts will make you better. I'm going, only if you are looking to be better.
Right.
Because I know people that were assholes before they started doing martial arts. And you know what? Years later, they're still assholes. They're just more technical and maybe dangerous.
Yeah.
That whole, Jiu Jitsu is for everyone. And then, a year later, it's for about a tenth of that. And 10 years down the road, it's for a few rare savages. We tend to get out there and careful to believe your own marketing hype. And I truly believe like everybody can benefit from martial arts. I've had my mom and dad trained with me, kids, family, everybody. But it's not for everybody.
Right.
And
not everybody is for it. I think that's what it is.
Exactly. I really like the way you said that. But we can preach the ideals, and I try to make sure that I want to have a culture on in my school and on my team and affiliates. And that's one thing I really pride myself on, is having that kind of sense of being better, being more. We do get to go out there. We're helping people get in better shape. We're teaching people how to defend themselves, which a lot of times for a lot of people just means giving them some self-confidence, helping them feel good about themselves, So there are definitely a lot of positive attributes, but to that blanket statement of, you're a good person, no, not necessarily.
We've all seen Karate Kid.
If you've met me, you know. It doesn't make you a better person. And I think like the benefits too, you're going to find the benefits that you want, that you're looking for out of it. If you want to be better at hurting people, then you're going to be better at hurting people. If you want to be better at a sport or as a martial artist, if you want to lose weight, you'll find those things. We should probably start wrapping it up though.
Okay.
You have an announcement. You don't even know you have an announcement.
I don't even know how to announce it.
Cole's podcast.
Oh,
I'll let you shut that up.
Yeah, I was actually wanting to do that. I'm glad you brought it up.
You did.
One of our buddies, Cole Miller, who's a UFC veteran, just started. Him and I went through the combatives course at the Air Force Academy, which is 7,200
with him in the neck brace.
Dude, how funny
is it? High elevation? Is that why he had the neck brace on?
That's his beard. That is actually his beard. Dude, I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, so Cole and I, he was one of the only civilians to go through the Air Force combatives course. So he started a podcast now. So for you guys out there who do listen to podcasts and are looking for a good one to check out, you can check out his. It's actually called the Mma Podcast. That's all.
Is that all it is?
Yeah, it's just called the Mma Podcast.
Who would have thought that wasn't taken yet?
I know. It may be. I don't know. But you can go check him out. Obviously Cole Miller on Instagram, and then he's got Miller Martial Arts on Instagram as well, and he's pushing the podcast on both of those. His first episode just got released. He's got his brother Micah on there, who is also a Bellator fighter. So
he's a Pride fighter too.
Exactly. So cool. Cole and his brother both come from a pretty strong background of fighters. Cole was basically a pro baseball player, so he's been a professional athlete, and his brother's a pro athlete. So they have some pretty good genetics there, out of Georgia. And so go check them out and give them a shout. Let them know you listen to them, and we always and the Hammercast. We don't want to forget those guys either.
The Hammercast.
So anytime we can pump those guys.
We also have to shout out Cruise Combat. We have our discount code, the Rough and Tumble with the ampersand. That's the and symbol. I'm going to educate everybody on what
everyone's going to use the
means.
asterisk if they do.
Yeah. She thought it was the at symbol.
Yeah.
Ampersand is what it's called. It's the and symbol. Rough and Tumble is,
and that's
the
ROUGH, because I have been asked so many times.
Is it Rough Riders? RUFF?
RYDERS? And like, I don't know why that is something that people thought we would do, but no, it's the actual word, rough.
Yeah. Go check out, if you listen to the podcast, look at the freaking logo.
I know.
It's above the podcast.
Yeah.
So go use the discount there for, I think it's 20% off of their products. You can get it, custom printed up shorts, custom printed t-shirts. They have printed t-shirts that they have designs on already. Same thing with shorts. They do all of my gym shorts, which I think are fantastic. All of my rash guards, which are outstanding. So go check that out at cruisecombat.com. Use the discount code Rough and Tumble, all capitals with the ampersand, and let us know how you like it. And Mr. Dring, thank you so much. It's a huge honor to have you on.
I appreciate it. I really enjoyed hanging out and visiting with you guys.
For sure, man.
It was awesome.
I wish we had more time. There was a whole much more stuff I would have loved to talk about. So hopefully we'll get you back in.
Well, I know
another
the
time.
guy. So.
Love to.
I think we have a connection, so it works out.
It does.
He can get us back here. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. You know, I haven't had a chance to talk to you before. We've crossed paths and through different tournaments and stuff like that, but never really got to sat down. And so I was really happy to get the opportunity to be able to ask questions and pick your brain about stuff. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got tremendous amounts of respect for you. Author, multiple black belts. How many black belts do you have altogether?
6.
You've fought before fighting was a thing. You know, you were on ESPN fighting when kickboxing was still cool. And then it went through a weird phase. Now it's becoming cool again. But you know, back when those guys when you saw like the badass kickboxing in the 70s, where everybody was like, "Holy shit, this is awesome," and they wanted to jump into it. Mr. Dring was in the middle of that and knocking fools' heads off. And you're just a master of fucking people up, and I love it. Like you're just
so much.
messing people up. So thank you so much for coming on. And we'll have you on again sometime in the near future. So appreciate it.